I'm Max Simon, the founder of Green Flower, the leaders in trusted cannabis education and knowledge. And through our efforts of producing thousands of hours of trusted cannabis content, we've had the unique privilege of speaking with thousands of people who are using cannabis to improve their lives. Veterans, civilians, people who are sick, and slowly, people are beginning to feel comfortable to talk about their experiences and tell others how the plant has helped them. This series is devoted to them, and we're proud of these brave people who are willing to share their story and stand up for something they believe in. Our hope is that this special brings new awareness to the value and benefits of cannabis for people who are dealing with real life-threatening situations, and also stimulates a genuine conversation about how to regulate this plant sensibly and effectively. Because unfortunately, cannabis is still mostly unavailable to the people who need it most. Let's better understand why.
My name's Aaron Augustus.
I'm Sean O'Brien.
Alexander de la Campa.
My name is Victor Manuel Martinez Jr.
John Silva Hennebree.
Lindsay Comey.
Ryan Miller, 38 years old, U.S. Marine Corps, corporal.
I was a sergeant in the United States Army for 5.5 years.
I served in the U.S. Army and I was a specialist.
My branch of service was the United States Navy. I was an E3 when I got out.
I was in the military from 1977 to 1981, and I left as an E4 sergeant.
United States Navy, Hospital Corpsman, 2nd class.
There was a lot of factors, I think, that went into why I joined the military. It definitely was a product of 9/11 and everything that happened during that time. The financial crisis was in full effect, and my family was a part of the other 16 million families that had struggles during that time, so options were limited for me.
My parents couldn't pay for me to go to college. I wasn't smart enough to win a scholarship, and I wasn't buffed or athletic enough to win a sports scholarship, so the only option pretty much for people like that is the military.
And I did not want to get married, I did not want to go into a factory job, but I wanted a career, and I wanted something that I thought was fair. And I thought the military would provide that. So I joined the military on Veterans Day in 1971 and was very proud to be finding a job that was honorable. That was really important to me.
I looked at the military as a way to go travel, meet new people, and also I wanted to do something that you can't normally do in the civilian world, which is use demolitions and types of weapons that the military has that only you have access to when you're in the military.
I wanted to prove to my dad that I could do it. I always felt like there was a void in my life because my grandfather was a combat vet, my great-grandfather was a combat vet, my dad was a combat vet. I had friends that were combat vets. So I was like, I'm gonna do it. And I went into the recruiting office and came out, signed up.
My grandfather spent 30 years in the Marines also. So I never really considered any other branch. It was the Marines for me. And it was also an opportunity for me to be the best, right? And to try my best. In high school, I didn't really apply myself. And so the Marine Corps was somewhere where I can start with a fresh slate and really give it everything I had.
When most people hear PTSD, they think it only applies to people who have been at war, but that's simply not true. Post-traumatic stress disorder can essentially happen to anyone who's experienced a traumatic event that causes some form of residual pain in someone's life. Yes, that could be battle or being in the military, but could also be sexual assault, emotional abuse, a natural disaster, or even just a really terrible life experience.
PTSD results from being exposed to a very traumatic event or traumatic events. And so you have these traumatic memories, whether they're from war, whether they're from rape, whether they're from being a police officer, being shot at all the time, you know, you have this trauma and you can't let it go. You have nightmares and it causes agitation and irritability and all these issues.
And it's basically diagnosed on symptoms as opposed to an MRI or CT scan of the brain, which isn't going to be particularly helpful.
PTSD is not about the type of trauma that you experience. It is about the neurobiological processes and the way people respond to that trauma.
I think that one of the most scary moments that I had was watching the news with Scud missiles going off and literally watching the war zone unfold and knowing that that's where I was about to be in a week or so. You're going to a war zone, you may or may not come back.
You want to know what combat was like, or what? I mean, that's kind of a tough question. Combat's scary. Combat smells. Combat is loud. It's fast. It happens and it's over with. And I don't even think you have time to, you just have time to react.
The guerrilla warfare started shortly after that, as far as IEDs and rockets being fired into our camps, things like that.
I was hit with an RPG, estimated 50 meters, hit 4 feet behind where I was sitting. Didn't penetrate the vehicle, but it felt like I've never been hit by a train, but that's the only thing I can compare it to because it moved a 20-ton vehicle to the left. And yeah, then the fight was on.
There's a lot of adrenaline, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of stress that you have to deal with. Also, as a leader, a sergeant, a team leader, you can't sit there and cry in front of your team, or you have to be projecting strength and leadership, so you have to really bottle up a lot of emotions.
Yeah, we're conditioned in this culture that's referred to as suck it up, right? Whatever you're feeling, however you're suffering, put that to the side and carry on with the mission, right? Mission accomplishment is paramount.
It's like shaking up a 2-liter bottle of soda and shaking it for 7 months, and then at the end you just put it on the shelf. It's gonna explode.
And everybody's kind of reflecting back. That's when you see the emotions come out. You know, I saw some looks on faces of my friends that I will never forget.
And you're gonna have to deal with those emotions, and that's what I underestimated the transition back from Iraq.
I received a pretty bad back injury, and they call it a traumatic brain injury, or a TBI. I spent 8 months in the hospital, you know, learning how to like walk in straight lines, and you know, I couldn't have really bright lights, and there was migraine headaches. There was a lot of anxiety and depression and associated with that as well.
In 1967, the Marines actually started to send women into combat areas under orders. And so the glass ceiling for women had been broken. I was the second enlisted woman that had ever been stationed at Naval Hospital Agana, Guam. They had no facilities for us to have any space to stay, so we were actually put up in a ward in the Naval Hospital. And they were so concerned about our safety that at night we would chain the door closed to make sure that no one came in and raped us. And as a young woman, I had no idea how deeply rape culture is embedded into military thinking. And that was something that, unfortunately, too many of us women learn. I think a lot of the post-traumatic stress that we see from women, it comes from the fact that not only do you have to do your job, you have to do your sergeant. How can that be? How can be the person that's giving you the orders that you're supposed to look up to harass you, force you into sexual activity, and that if you don't comply, they rate you. They're the person that rates you. When you get your reports on how you're doing, or if you're ever going to advance in your job, it's based for a lot of women on how much this man likes you. And I didn't know that orders into combat meant that when you got stationed with a group of men and you were one of two women, you were targeted, that very action took place. that you're not safe anywhere around military, that was a horrible lesson to learn.
When we are exposed to a dangerous situation, the amygdala, which is the emotional regulator for the brain, it turns on our stress axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. When the stress axis gets turned on, it starts cranking out these stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, and it puts us in a fight or flight mode. And historically, from an evolutionary basis, this is a great system. If we were out trying to find food and suddenly a saber-toothed tiger was there and it wanted to eat us, we either had to fight that thing off or we had to run away. That system is supposed to turn off when the danger is over. With PTSD, the prefrontal cortex forgets to tell the amygdala to turn this stress response system off. So we get this chronic elevation of these stress hormones that can have an impact on virtually every system of the body. Ultimately, can cause a reduction in volume of certain parts of the brain. The amygdala can lose volume. So it's less able to actually regulate these emotional responses. And we see reduction in volume of the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus is an important part of the brain. Its purpose is to put these bad memories into long-term storage so that they're not bothering us anymore. When the hippocampus is not functioning properly, something may come up that's completely unrelated to the original trauma, but it still triggers that same emotional memory. Tells the amygdala, okay, it's time to turn on the stress axis again, there's danger, and you're right back in that situation of that hyper-arousal.
People will have nightmares, wake up about what happened to them in Afghanistan or Iraq, or they'll have some triggering event. 4th of July, and suddenly they hear the fireworks and that triggers an event. So they have these intrusive memories.
It's often triggered by dates, memories, those kind of things. I think emotionally, nobody likes it that we're stuck, that we're filled with anger and rage. And you know, people say, oh, you should work on your anger management. And it's like, oh, I have. I really have.
PTSD for me is chaos. Chaos in my brain. Things that aren't there that are, I think they're there.
Side effects are like the depression and anxiety because you can't go outside, you can't do the things you want to do, and so you wind up getting all hype and stressed out.
You lose track of whether your emotions are causing your symptoms, whether your symptoms are causing your emotions, right? It's just...
There's a lot of emotions, being scared, because I don't care how tough you think you are, if you go to a combat zone and you're there for long enough, it will break you down.
For basically my entire 20s, I had this viewpoint that since I didn't die in combat for my country, every day that I lived, I wish that I did to some degree.
People who have been abused as children or have been repeatedly exposed to life-threatening situations are at a greater risk for developing PTSD.
I am 49 years old. I have PTSD from extreme child abuse. I've had it since I was 7, and I was diagnosed at 17. It's always been a nightmare, a horrific situation for me. My very first memory is at the age of 2.5, hearing a beating I had 6 months earlier. Being hurt is something that accumulates within a person, and it has a neurological effect. And as we grow older, it has a deeper effect on us. It filters through us. It becomes harder and harder to deal with. And when I was 27 years old, I committed suicide. I took, the doctor said 400 sleeping pills, and I think it was a little bit over 300. And then when I was 37, I had a second suicide attempt. I was trying to work, and with PTSD, it was just, I was doing really good, but I just didn't have a physical ability to be around people, and I was having a sensation of wanting to jump in front of a train. And that second suicide attempt hurt me so badly, I didn't realize how bad it hurt me. It essentially left me bedridden, and I didn't have any way of getting out of that. I was so hurt. I remember telling people, I'm too hurt to survive. There's just no way I'm going to be able to get beyond this.
Treating PTSD is complicated and difficult. For starters, 50% of those with PTSD don't seek treatment at all, which leaves them alone to deal with a very challenging situation. But for those who do seek help, there's usually only a few proposed and not very effective solutions.
Pharmaceuticals, they just don't work very well for PTSD. And the reason for that is pharmaceuticals are designed to be very specific in their mechanism of action. PTSD is not a specific disorder.
Patients with PTSD often have comorbid substance use disorders. So a lot of them are already alcoholics or hard drug addicts or opiate abusers.
You know, I've met a veteran through the San Francisco VA who was issued or prescribed opiates, and your tolerance builds up to opiates. So you need more and more and more. And eventually the VA cut him off because he needed such a high dose for it to be effective. They were concerned or what have you, and they decided to just cut him off. Well, where do you think that veteran went? He went to the street to get heroin.
Part of trying to deal with these struggles is that we go for the things that are available to us and are socially acceptable. And I think alcohol is a big common denominator. And I think for a lot of us, that's where we get into a lot of trouble.
I got to a place where, I was sleeping in my car for a little while because I didn't have a place to live, and my alcohol use was getting pretty bad.
I was very disciplined in the Army during the week. I would never drink during the week. And then when I got out, I found myself starting with a 24-ouncer, then a 6-pack, then a 12-pack, then an 18-pack, and I'm drinking as much of it as I can. If it's there, I'm drinking it.
Here's where our story takes a turn for the better, because we'll discover that cannabis often becomes a quick and effective path to a better life. Not only is it an all-natural alternative to pharmaceuticals and alcohol with exponentially less side effects, but it just so happens to successfully help with many of the conditions that PTSD creates.
Why do we use cannabis for treating PTSD? Well, because it's the only medication that's effective. I see that cannabis is really effective at treating anxiety, especially the type of hyperarousal anxiety that we see with PTSD. It can help turn off those racing thoughts. It can help people sleep better. It can help stop the nightmares. It's really effective at decreasing irritability and anger.
I feel like a lot of times it helps me with my anger when I get triggered, and my rage. I can feel my rage meter start to rise. I can go out and smoke and just relax, and it gives you a good feeling.
I would smoke cannabis, and I would look outside and look at the palm trees and the blue sky and then it would recenter me, and I'd be like, okay, cool, I'm back in sunny San Diego, sunny California. So I think part of the misconception on cannabis is that it can get you out of your mind, and your mental state is not there. Well, for me, it actually brought me back down to a point of grounding where I could relax and focus on being here.
And I noticed that it helped me with my sleeping, it helped me with anxiety and calming down, and so I started using it in a more of a medicinal aspect instead of just a sociological aspect.
When I was overseas, that was the first time that I actually experienced strong cannabis. And that was a place that I started to find that I could counteract some of these issues without being so negative on myself, that I wasn't hungover, that I wasn't having issues, I wasn't picking fights.
When you use cannabis in a PTSD patient, not only are you reducing their symptoms of PTSD, you're often reducing their alcohol and drug use.
I find it interesting because one of the first changes I made was I smoked cannabis, right? And that, I can honestly say that cannabis was one of the main reasons why I stopped my use of alcohol.
Yeah, it just helps me relax. It helps me relax and kind of get back focused on, okay, those triggers are just triggers. Let's move forward with the evening, and it calms me. It has a calming effect with me.
You're alleviating their symptoms of anxiety and depression. You're improving family dynamics because now there's less drug use or there's less anger.
It is fun to play with my kids, you know. It is fun to play with my kids in general, but yeah, I mean, who doesn't like a little smoke, and makes the mood happy, you know.
There's less depression, there's less issues at work. They're not getting fired from their jobs because now they're able to have normal interpersonal relationships.
But I started to find that I was able to sleep better, I was eating more regularly, and that I wasn't having the fighting problems that I was getting into when I was using alcohol as my relaxant.
The best scientific study so far, and it was with veterans who had PTSD. It helped eliminate nightmares, extinguish intrusive thoughts, and by and large they had a better sense of well-being.
And so when you have an endocannabinoid deficiency or dysfunction, you're no longer able to forget. And so that's why cannabis helps PTSD, because it activates your cannabinoid receptors and helps you let go of those horrible memories that are keeping you up at night, that are just causing you not to be able to function.
And for example, they can show in rats that if you give them CBD and then expose them to some trauma, a shock or something, the CBD significantly reduces that response. Or you block their CBD that's naturally occurring in their bodies, and they get much more symptomatic, like PTSD. What it helps is it extinguishes adverse memories, which is kind of really at the heart of PTSD.
The social anxiety piece for me, cannabis is, significantly managed. I was terrified to introduce myself to strangers. In the military, you have your family name, you have your branch of service, you have rank on your collar, and that describes exactly where you are, what your purpose is, and where your hierarchy is in society. But once you take that uniform off, I have to prove my value now, other than what's worn on my collar, and was tough for me to manage. But I found that if I rolled a joint and lit it in public, people introduced themselves to me. I didn't have to introduce myself to others. And so over time, that practice has really helped me manage that social anxiety piece.
So primarily when I'm feeling a little anxious and a little stressful, I would medicate with a little bit of indica to let me calm down some. But when I'm feeling pain in my shoulder or in my back, what I'd like now is that we have tinctures and patches, and so I would just medicate, and that would help me calm down so I can kind of think things through and how to deal with life a little better. And also it helped with the inflammation and the pain I was suffering. So
all cannabis use is wellness oriented. So say we talk to the recreational user, the one that says, hey, I believe in the cancer fighting and the epilepsy, but I just like to get high, right? Well, when you dig a little deeper and you ask them, well, when do you like to get high? It's at the end of a long day at work, helps me relax, helps encourage my appetite, helps me play with my kids and connect with them, helps me with intimacy with my partner and achieve sleep. Right? So when you dig a little deeper into the recreational user, you learn that it's all wellness oriented.
Cannabis in my clinical practice not only is the only thing that's effective for treating PTSD, but it's the only medication that is rapidly able to reduce suicidal thinking in a majority of patients.
The day I started using prana, my life was a hell. And I went out, I took a ride that day, and I said, okay, I want to remember this moment. I want to remember exactly where I'm at. I want to see what I see right now. I want to experience what I'm experiencing right now. And what marijuana did, and medical marijuana, and especially CBD, is it enabled me to have a way to go on, and then it enabled me to have a way to heal, to where I could separate from the hurt, and then I could be of that healed place. And it saved my life. It enabled me to live. I'm having relationships with people now where I never had relationships before. It enabled me to have a place to where I can work through this hurt and separate from the hurt and be in a place of healed, and to where I could start to live and be like other people in some kind of way where I have a chance to experience life or love with life. It's just amazing. Thank you, ma'am.
Cannabis has been the thing that has helped not only elevate my mood in terms of dealing with irritability and anxiety, in terms of just being a productive member of society, but it's really helped with my pain control and being able to function. And that without access to cannabis, I do not think I would be a functioning member of society. So for me, it's been a lifesaver. Now.
If cannabis is so effective for helping with PTSD, what's the holdup? The answer to that question is pretty frustrating.
A lot of people talk about, gee, writing prescriptions for cannabis. No physician can write a prescription for cannabis. It's a Schedule I drug.
It's unfortunate that the VA counselors are restricted by Schedule I and by the federal government on what they can and cannot say and recommend.
There needs to be a lot of education on proper use. That's one of the downsides right now of not being able to talk to the VA about it.
What a difference it would be every Monday morning if active duty troops were using cannabis recreationally for relaxation instead of alcohol that is so promoted within the military structure.
You'd have a lot more veterans that aren't so hype and wired and messed up mentally on all these opioids that they're giving to poor guys.
Like, what is it going to take? 22 suicides a day aren't enough? What's it going to take, for our policymakers to really affect change, this change that we desperately need?
To complicate matters even further, here in California, when cannabis was legalized under Prop 64, a side effect was that we lost what was known as the Compassionate Care Act. This was a program that allowed for cannabis to be donated to those in need and was actually a primary source of quality, clean cannabis for veterans who were financially challenged after returning from service.
So for myself, on a very limited income, what I found is that I was no longer able to access the same quality stuff that I was getting, especially edibles. How can that be? How can legalizing marijuana turn into the war and compassion? But that, unfortunately, is what Prop 64 has done.
It was the difference between having a way to go on and not having a way to go on. What people take for granted is basic functions in life. People with PTSD having access to marijuana, it becomes a life and death struggle. If you have it, then you have a way to live. You have a way to get through one more day. If you don't, then it's going to become way too much, and things might be too hard to go on.
It's important to note here that cannabis is not the only solution for PTSD, but rather one of the tools needed to properly recover. People suffering with PTSD need support, connection, and a place where you can relate with others.
Operation EVAC is a support group I attend twice a month. It is an outlet, a place where it's not my friends or my family, and I can go and we can discuss our problems without, I feel like, burdening anybody. And we can just kind of all share and compare. So yeah, this gives me a safe place to go and just talk to people.
It's a cold world outside of our environment. It's dangerous, there's risks involved, there's uncertainty involved. And so for 90 minutes, you get an opportunity to find peace and camaraderie with folks that understand exactly what you're going through and exactly what you've been through. Because there's a large disconnect between what we've experienced and what the general population has experienced.
It's actually a great thing because when we're sitting in these meetings and you're hearing these veterans talking about how they were on alcohol or how they were on meth or they were on their opioids and in their chronic pain, and then going to Ryan's meetings, how that's helped them wean off of all these other narcotics and slowly segue into a more healthy lifestyle via cannabis. It's like, yeah, that's really cool. I think one of the greatest things for me was at one of Ryan's meetings was when a World War II vet came in. It was like, yes, sir, man. And he was talking about how cannabis has helped him out and things like that. And it was like, this was from some guy in his 80s. I was like, yeah, nice.
That was one of the best things that I had was, help Operation Evac, which was community, hearing stories, how people are using it, allowed me to develop my own way.
My PTSD was so severe that I couldn't talk to anybody. I couldn't be around anybody. And then they told me, they go, hey, there's a guy, his name is Ryan, and he's gonna be having a veteran support group for PTSD. And would you be interested in something like that? And I was like, man, I wanna do that.
John's a civilian, and John is the first civilian that asked me if he could join this group. And I had a tough decision to make. Right? I was like, do I want to keep it exclusively vets, or do I want to practice inclusivity and invite John to join us?
And I was the first civilian that he able to join his veteran support group.
Honestly, it's been one of the best decisions I've ever made in terms of this group. John has transformed. He's not the same John that I knew years ago. And I'm just so grateful, man, that how much you've matured and grown and healed. It's fantastic. It's really an inspiration.
The things that are said there, the way people are reflecting with PTSD in life, I completely understand. And it helps me to know that I'm not alone. More so, it's the veterans and who they are. They help me out just by being who they are. Home is not necessarily who you're related with, and it's rather who accepts you. And when you're in a supportive environment and people are accepting you, then you have a place to heal and to grow and to become better.
There's other people out there that have the same feelings. That's the biggest thing that was the biggest thing for me, is hearing other people's problems or issues or whatnot and going, wow, yeah, I can relate to that. And that's helpful.
And so Operation Evac allows us to do a meditation that's very specific towards PTSD. And then it's a full body meditation to allow us to get in touch with those areas and understanding of those emotions and start to integrate within ourselves a positive framework of healing. And this development of this meditation really has changed my life. I found that I have become a kinder person, and a lot of the bitterness that I experienced about my military experience, it allowed me to pull the good parts out of it. Breathing in that intimacy with that group of warriors has really allowed me to heal in ways I didn't know needed healing.
And everybody always left that place, always feeling much better, always having a place of community.
Veterans specifically, I would say that there's a lot of education to be had in responsible cannabis use. So going forward, find an Operation Evac, meeting and come hang out and learn.
Create awareness, and that's why I'm so excited to work with Green Flower to help spread our message. If we can reach one troop that is on the ledge, that's at the point of causing harm to themselves. If we could save one body, then we've succeeded. Right? If we can help one elder transition from pharmaceuticals into cannabis use, then it's a success. Even at end of life, right? If we can help troops be coherent and aware and with their families instead of an opiate-induced stupor, then that's a success.
Thank you so much for watching. We hope that this program has been enlightening for you and that you feel inspired to help make a change. In our eyes, that looks like 3 steps. First, please share this program with your social networks and friends to help bring more awareness and dialogue to this important issue. Secondly, there's a lot of movement happening in government right now around cannabis. Support it. Support candidates who believe cannabis legalization is valuable to our society and support issues that bring clean and safe cannabis access to people who need it. And finally, consider looking at cannabis as not something that just gets you high, but rather a plant with an enormous range of benefits and possibilities, many of which we're only just beginning to truly understand. Ultimately, our outdated laws and views on cannabis need to change, and that begins with you. So thanks for watching, thanks for sharing, and thanks for being on the right side of history. We believe that in 100 years, cannabis will be as widely accepted as Advil, and more importantly, will be used by hundreds of millions of people to bring relief, happiness, and the quality of life that they deserve.